Joining us now to discuss a number of those key races is UNC Charlotte political professor, Dr. Eric Heberlig. Good morning, Dr. Heberlig.
Good morning.
Can we talk about first, let's just go ahead and talk about your thoughts on the presidential race. I know we talked earlier this weekend. You said North Carolina was key, and we did see that go to former President Trump.
Yeah, and we saw kind of a run of the board in competitive states. The undecided voters all seem to shift the same way across the map, regardless of where they were nationally, and that benefited Donald Trump substantially.
Benefited Donald Trump substantially. What do you make of the fact that looking past towards 2020 to 2024, Trump's ability to win these swing states that Democrats thought they would have a good chance in places like Michigan, North Carolina, and Georgia?
Yeah, the suburban voters, highly educated voters that Kamala Harris was aiming for, particularly the voters who voted for Nikki Haley in the Republican primaries, they stuck with the Republicans largely. Her gains were minimal there, got less than Joe Biden did in the suburbs, and Trump continued to run up huge margins in rural areas.
And when we look at those rural areas, there are a few counties that switched here in some of those swing states. Was it all the campaigning leading up to the election of paying the attention to the rural areas that you think put former President Trump over the top?
I think it was really the economy. Voters tend to vote based on the economy, based on performance, less than any potential policy promises. And voters have been consistent over the past couple of years that they felt squeezed by inflation and high prices, and they don't like the direction of the country. And that's bad news for the incumbent candidate, in this case, the incumbent party. And Kamala Harris wasn't able to get an economic message through that assuaged those voters' doubts.
Looking at that economic message, there has been some criticism of President Joe Biden talking about the fact that he didn't really get out there and tout the fact that the United States has rebounded quicker than some other countries coming out of the pandemic, economy-wise, dealing with inflation. How much blame do you place on the president in terms of his maybe inability to get out there and campaign following the midterms?
Well, I'm not sure that would have made much of a difference. If you look at elections across the globe in the past year, incumbent governments, whether they're liberal governments or conservative governments, have consistently done less well than they did previously. When voters are unhappy with inflation, which happened worldwide, they take it out on the incumbents. Joe Biden's ability as a messenger, as we saw in the first presidential debate, is minimal. So I don't think his campaigning more aggressively would have made much of a difference here.
Can we go ahead and look down the ticket now? Of course, people voting for former President Trump, but they did elect Governor-elect Josh Stein. So what does that mean here when voters are looking at the federal and then the politics here on the state level?
Yeah, Democrats in North Carolina are able to consistently get about 2 to 3 points better than their federal candidates. And we saw that in spades in this election. Donald Trump winning pretty easily, but Democratic governor candidate Josh Stein winning very easily, and a number of Democratic candidates, say Attorney General, Lieutenant Governor, being able to win statewide as well. So you have a number of voters in North Carolina who tend to think that national Democratic candidates are too liberal, but are more willing to support more moderate local candidates.
Looking at Stein and what he's going to face as governor there, we look at Republicans that look to seem to lose their supermajority in Raleigh. What is that going to do in terms of bringing back the power of the governor's veto?
Yeah, the supermajority in the legislature is really key for Josh Stein to have any leverage in getting any policy concessions out of the legislature. Governor Cooper faced a Republican supermajority. As long as they kept their votes together, they didn't have to negotiate with the governor. They could override his veto. So those few seats in the legislature will be a key in terms of whether Josh Stein is able to get any of his policy goals addressed.
And when you look at those policies, though, do you think that there will be, for these next 4 years, a lot of policies passed here in North Carolina, or will there be a lot of battle between the state House and Senate?
Well, I think it's a key in terms of whether Democrats are able to pick up those couple of seats that give them the ability to block Republicans from overriding vetoes. that gives them a negotiating seat at the table. Otherwise, Republicans can just do what they want.
I do want to take things and look at it at a federal, state level as well. Obviously, we talked about the fact Democrats did well in North Carolina, but if you're the Democratic Party in North Carolina, looking at it nationally as well, and you're kind of picking up the pieces here, Monday morning quarterbacking, what went wrong on the federal and maybe getting that push from the state level there, the governor, lieutenant governor, attorney general, not being able to translate that to the presidential election? What went wrong?
The Democrats are continuing to hemorrhage votes in rural areas. They used to do well, particularly down east in rural areas. Those voters have been drifting away from them slowly over the past generation, more quickly over the past few. And unless they can convince working class voters, who are the majority of voters, that Democrats understand and prioritize their issues, they're going to continue to struggle because that's where the votes are.
So how do they do that? How do they, in the next couple of years before the midterms come up, how do they start showing that they are caring about those voters?
Meeting with them, developing policies that specifically speak to their priorities and needs, being willing to push back on agendas from traditional progressive Democrats that really rub more moderate voters the wrong way.
Dr. Heberlig, I do want to ask you, with Trump winning the presidency here, as we know that the race has been called in his favor, just looking at the historic element of this, we've seen Trump campaign through being in court, dealing with that, being out of office for 4 years. Have you ever seen something quite like what we have witnessed over the past 4 to 8 years?
No, it really is remarkable. I think if you'd have asked people any number of years ago, would you be willing to vote for a convicted criminal for president or any other office, they'd say no. Would you be willing to vote for someone who asked a state secretary of state to find votes for him to overturn election results? Of course, they'd say no. And other candidates who campaigned in Trump's mold, such as Mark Robinson here in North Carolina, Kerry Lake in Arizona, lost pretty resoundingly. So it's interesting that voters may not have changed their standards, but they certainly give Trump the benefit of the doubt in just about every possible circumstance.
All right, so Dr. Heberlig, now that we've got this historic election, we're still going to be talking about it for a while, but when we look at this and we get to January, what is the commentary going to be like? Because at first, with the win, it was, thank you, let's bring them all together. Does that message stay the same or does it change?
The message from Trump has been quite consistent over his 8 years or so in the political realm. I think we're going to hear more of this. He's going to take the election results as an affirmation of his political style and political agenda. So we're going to get it full throttle.